is the cause, God is the one who caused this infinite series to exist. But then let's say that I believe that God is himself a temporal being who subsists in moments, who subsists in time, like creation. Well, in that case, what I end up doing is I say something like, okay, so God is the cause of this timeline. He causes it to exist. But now I have to posit like a divine timeline where God's life subsists in a bunch of moments as well, where, you have moment, I'm going to do DA for divine A. So moment divine A preceded by moment, divine B. And because God is, again, everlasting, you would just go back for infinity. So now God has his own infinite timeline, if you will. And the question we're going to want to ask about that is, okay, well, why does God's life subsist in these moments? Why doesn't God's life subsist in another set of moments? And you see, we're just basically asking the same question about God that we were asking about creation. And again, the only way you can answer that question is to appeal to something external to God, which has caused God to exist in these moments, in which case God's not really God. He's not ultimate reality, right? So that's not an option. And so then what you would have to do is say, well, God must have caused himself to subsist in these moments. But if God caused himself to subsist in these moments, then he already has to exist in order to do that, which means he's already subsisting in a moment, which means now you have a God who's created himself. Is everyone kind of following? The only way that you can escape the absurdity, and the only way that God remains God, is to say that God transcends time itself, which is to say that God does not subsist in moments in the way that creation subsists in moments. And again, subsist just means to exist in. So I'm saying that God does not exist in moments. And so, this is what gives us the idea of an eternal cause. So the cause of time is eternal. We can't even comprehend the eternal cause with temporal categories because it transcends all temporal categories. Go ahead.
So I just had a question. So in Scripture, obviously, God refers to time and events. And, I was just thinking of when Jesus said, no one knows the hour but the Father. So he obviously refers to time and seasons. Mm-hmm. And so would that be something God put in place for our mutability to give us that?
Yeah, so even though God transcends time, he still knows the day and hour that he's going to send the sun back, right? Mm-hmm. So God, he possesses a perfect knowledge of this, timeline.
Another example of the burning bush.
Yeah, so he remains transcendent to time, but he possesses a perfect knowledge of history and determines, when the Son becomes incarnate or even comes back to, judge man.
I was thinking, he kind of defies science. Like fire burns up. I mean, he's like above that too, where he just doesn't operate like that.
Right.
He's just above. Which goes back to you saying he doesn't need anything, which I never really thought about it that way. He didn't need the wood, that source, to be a flame. He could do it without it.
Right.
But yeah, he just defies time, he defies science because he's outside of it and he operates somehow, some different way.
Exactly.
Than what he created is beneath him.
Exactly.
I see an interesting connection with his referral to his creation, what we were just talking about. He starts talking about time and talking about man and how difficult it is for his creation to identify the creator, but going backwards up the same street. You know,
Mhm.
it makes sense to me that it would be hard for us to even identify what he is.
Mhm.
It's so easy for him, obviously, but for the creation to identify the creator, that's counterintuitive in my head.
Right. Yeah, and especially given that we're beings that exist in time and space, we just naturally think in those categories. That's what we're most familiar with. And anytime you come to a new concept, the temptation is you want to conceptualize it in light of the categories that you're most familiar with. But in the case of God, that always leads to error or confusion, because now you're trying to categorize him. You're trying to categorize an eternal, timeless being in light of temporal categories, and that always ends in absurdity.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Just categorizing something that can't be categorized.
Yeah, right. Wrong category. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I just had a question with the infinite series, the DC.
Yeah.
Are you trying to say, like, make some people come at it like, I was just thinking like evolution where like man came from monkey, like something, there was a shift, and then D made C, is that kind of what you're trying to
Right.
say? Instead of just God made man and man, people are just like, no, it can't be that easy, it had to mutate, is that what you were kind of saying?
Oh, well,
With
so
DC?
the point I'm making with this is that what people do is when they want to explain why the world is the way that it is currently, they always want to appeal to what came prior, which is fine. There's something natural about that. You know, we always appeal to that which, how did you get here today? Well, you would point to things previous. You have a car. You bought a car at some point. Things like that. We naturally, we look into the past to try and explain how the world has come to the point that it's come to. And some people, the temptation for some people anyways, is that, well, if we push that back infinitely, then we no longer require God to explain the existence of the world, because we can just appeal to this infinite series of causes. And what I'm pointing out is that, well, for the sake of argument, I can give that to you. And again, that's not to say that I agree with it, but it's for the sake of argument. I can give that to you, and it doesn't escape the metaphysical question of why the world subsists in this series of moments rather than some other series of moments. And they could say, well, the series of moments is infinite. And I'll just say, so what? It doesn't matter if it's an infinite series or a finite series. Why does the world subsist in this series rather than some other series? And it's getting back to the notion of creation's mutability. It's because creation is mutable that hypothetically it can subsist in all sorts of different series of events. No single series is necessary, which then raises the question, okay, why does it subsist in this series rather than some other series? And the only valid answer that you can give to that question is to appeal to something that transcends time itself.
Which would be God created man to glorify himself.
Right, so that would tie into it, yeah. Yeah. God is the one who determines the series and everything that exists in the series. Yeah.
So I might have a dumb question. So an example of what you just said, hypothetically. So let's say I talk with someone who's outside of Christ and they say, well, we have, bad suicide rates because of this prior. But I would say, no, it's because of sin. Is that kind of what you're explaining, or no?
Not quite.
Okay.
Even when you point to sin, you're still pointing to something that happened. And
Okay.
There's a history of sin, right? But what I'm really getting at is that whatever history looks like, why didn't it look different? If history subsists in one set of moments, why not subsist in it? Why did it not subsist in different sets of
Like,
moments?
why didn't Hitler, rise to power and never die? And what if,
Yeah.
why didn't he live and then America was fallen, or,
Exactly. Yeah, because you do that even in fiction, literature. You have it's a genre of fiction called alternative history, where it basically just tells a story from what if history had played out differently. So you have this alternative timeline. And the fact that we can conceive of these alternative timelines is a testament to the mutability of the world, because we can conceive of other ways that things could have played out. And so then that raises the question, well, why didn't it play out that way? And you can appeal to historical events to a degree to explain why history played out the way that it did. But ultimately, at some point, you're going to have to appeal to something that transcends history itself. And so, I'll get to your question in a moment, Dane.
I'll forget it in a moment. No, just kidding. Go ahead. I know, right?
Another helpful analogy might be that of an author and his book, like a work of fiction. So let's take if you take The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And if you were to ask, in that story, because there's a point at which Edmund betrays his siblings to the witch. And so if you were to ask, okay, well, why did Edmund do that? Well, naturally you would look for the explanation within the narrative itself, that there's a history between Edmund and his siblings. And so you're going to look to that